After an exhausting week at work, all I wanted was to relax and relieve some stress. It was almost 2 in the morning, and fatigue was battling against the caffeine still running through my body. I decided to take a drive before heading home. Hunger started to bother me too, so I remembered the Burger King near the highway exit just 15 minutes away. It was my favorite spot for late-night snacks, not just for the convenience, but because that place always had something comforting in the middle of the night. When I got there, the drive-thru had a short line, but something immediately caught my attention. An old, worn-out Ford Escort parked in the darkest corner of the lot. Its windows were tinted and it looked like no one was inside. I found it strange, considering Burger King was only serving drive-thru orders at that time. I tried to ignore it while placing my order, a Whopper and a portion of fries. As I waited for my food, another car entered the parking lot. It was a large black SUV. It stopped briefly near the Escort, and the driver seemed to glance toward the drive-thru before parking further away. A man got out, casually dressed and holding his phone, but I kept an eye on him as he walked back to his car. Something felt off. After picking up my food, I decided not to go straight home. The lookout point on the hill, which I used to frequent with my high school friends, seemed like a good idea. It was a quiet place, surrounded by forest, with an incredible view of the illuminated city. I drove there, and upon arriving at the small gravel parking area, I noticed it was completely empty. I parked my car near the trail entrance and turned off the engine. For a few minutes, I just enjoyed the silence, but something was bothering me. Then I saw headlights entering the lot. It was the Ford Escort. My heart started to race. The car parked on the opposite side, but no one got out. The silence returned to the area, but I felt uneasy. To avoid being alone in such a strange situation, I called my friend Camila, who lived just a few minutes away. She had always been someone I could trust, and she was brave enough to handle any situation. I explained what was happening and asked her to meet me there. "Are you serious?" "You're crazy, but I'm coming," she replied, laughing but sounding a bit concerned. While I waited, another car appeared. It was the same black SUV I had seen at Burger King. This time, the driver got out and took a good look around before heading onto the trail leading to the lookout. Now, there were 3 cars in the lot, including mine, and the situation was starting to feel like more than a coincidence. Camila arrived shortly after, bringing her cousin Rafael, a former military officer who was visiting. "What's this story about being followed? Are you paranoid?" Rafael asked, while Camila just stared at the SUV with a serious expression. I explained what had happened, but Rafael, always skeptical, suggested we were overreacting. Maybe the guy's just enjoying the lookout. Relax. Even so, we decided to go up to the top to eat and talk. As we climbed the trail, we passed the man from the SUV who was sitting on a bench looking at his phone. He glanced up briefly, and although he didn't seem threatening, his reserved demeanor was unsettling. When we reached the lookout, the view was as stunning as I remembered. We had been there for a few minutes, eating and chatting, when Camila noticed something. "Do you see that? Someone's following us." I turned around and saw a figure emerging from the trail. It was a man in a jacket, walking slowly. As he got closer, I realized it was the same guy from the Ford Escort. He glanced at us quickly before sitting in another corner of the lookout. A short time later, the man from the SUV also appeared, now accompanied by a nervous-looking woman. They exchanged glances, but no one said anything. Suddenly, Camila stood up. "Something's wrong. Let's head down." Rafael still didn't seem convinced, but when he looked toward the trail, he saw 2 other figures approaching. They were 2 men, both wearing heavy jackets and caps, and something about the way they walked felt off. They clearly weren't there to enjoy the view. As we hurried down the trail, we heard footsteps behind us. Rafael, who was leading the way, stopped and turned around. "They're following us." He gestured for us to pick up the pace, but before we could reach the parking lot, a 3rd figure appeared at the base of the trail, blocking the path. Camila pulled out her phone and called the police, while Rafael assumed a defensive stance. "Don't make any sudden moves," he whispered. The men began to approach us, but to our surprise, the man from the SUV came running down the trail and shouted, "Leave them alone." He seemed to be trying to intervene. There was a tense moment of silence, and then the men backed off, exchanging glances with him before disappearing into the forest. We quickly returned to our cars, and the man from the SUV introduced himself. His name was Lucas, and he explained that he had been investigating a series of robberies that had been occurring in that area at night. He was an off-duty police officer and had noticed the suspicious behavior of the Ford Escort at Burger King, just as we did. The men who followed us were part of a group that had been using the lookout as a meeting point. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, but the men who had followed us had already disappeared into the forest. While we waited, Lucas continued explaining his theory. He believed the group had been using Burger King and other 24-hour locations as surveillance points, choosing unsuspecting victims to follow and potentially rob or intimidate. You were lucky I was nearby. We've been keeping an eye on them for weeks, but I didn't have enough evidence to act officially, Lucas said, glancing at the dark trail. If they had managed to corner you, it could have ended much worse. Camila was still trembling, clutching her phone tightly. Raphael, usually confident, seemed shaken. This is bigger than it looks, man. They weren't just trying to scare us. They were ready for something serious, he said, looking at me and Camila with an unusual sense of concern. The police asked us a few questions, but without catching the suspects in the act or having concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do that night. Lucas took the opportunity to share the photos Camila had taken of the men and their suspicious vehicles. He also recommended that Camila and I contact the local police station the next day to formally report the incident. Meanwhile, Lucas offered to escort us to a safe location. I'll follow you to one of your homes to make sure no one tries to follow or intimidate you afterward. We agreed with relief, and Raphael decided to stay with us until morning, as he wasn't comfortable leaving us alone. On the way, Lucas shared more details. One of the suspects has a record. He's already been arrested for assault and illegal possession of a firearm. He was recently released, and ever since, we've been hearing reports of suspicious activity. This is no coincidence. After dropping us off, Lucas promised to keep us updated on any developments in the case. If they try anything again, I'll make sure the police are ready to act. But for now, avoid isolated places, especially at night. The next morning, still shaken, Camila, Raphael, and I decided to meet again to discuss what had happened. We went to the local police station and submitted the photos and a full account of the incident. The investigators seemed interested, especially since Lucas had already flagged suspicions about this group. Meanwhile, the fear of being followed or running into those men again began to grow. During the following week, I avoided going out late at night. Camila started carrying pepper spray, and Raphael insisted we buy tactical flashlights, just as a precaution. A week later, Lucas contacted me. He informed me that the group had been found in another isolated location, an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of the city. They were detained for possession of weapons and attempted robbery. It seems we managed to prevent something worse from happening that night, he said. But that only happened because you were smart enough to ask for help and stay alert. The news brought great relief but still left a lasting impression. I never looked at quiet places the same way again. Even though I loved that lookout, it now carried memories of a night that could have ended very differently. To this day, I'm grateful to Lucas for his intervention, to Camila for her courage, and to Raphael for his protective presence. In the months that followed, the incident remained etched in our memories as a turning point. Every time the topic came up, we realized how many signs we had missed that now seemed so obvious. Camila started carrying a small flashlight and a whistle in her bag. I'm not going to be vulnerable out there anymore, she'd say, with a seriousness that hadn't been part of her carefree personality before. Raphael, on the other hand, used the episode as an opportunity to teach us basic self-defense techniques. He even convinced us to attend a few martial arts classes. It might seem like overkill now, but you never know when this stuff could come in handy, he argued. Over time, amateur detectives became an inside nickname Raphael used to tease us, but it also turned into a sort of comforting joke. Do you guys remember when I said you were being paranoid? Well, good thing you were. You should start your own investigation agency, he joked. However, beneath the humor, there was a quiet acknowledgement that we had narrowly escaped something potentially dangerous. Camila, who once loved late-night outings, now preferred to plan our get-togethers during busier hours. She often said, "I'd rather deal with people complaining about the noise than with deadly silence." As for me, I noticed I had developed an almost obsessive habit of checking my mirrors while driving. I'd constantly pat my pockets, ensuring my phone and keys were there, as if they were talismans against the unexpected. And what about Burger King? It became a symbol of that strange episode. I still enjoyed the food, but now I made sure to go only during the day, and always with company. The simple sight of the sign at night gave me a strange feeling, a mix of nostalgia and unease. One time, Camila even commented, "It might sound silly, but that place kind of lost its charm, don't you think? It feels like there's always something lurking around there." Even so, one day we decided to go back to Burger King together, more as a kind of closure ritual than out of actual desire. The atmosphere seemed different, brighter, safer, but perhaps it was just the daylight masking our insecurities. Sitting at one of the outdoor tables, we looked at the empty parking lot and laughed nervously. "You realize this is where it all started, right?" Raphael said, pointing to the corner where the Ford Escort had been parked. That visit helped ease some of the weight the incident had left behind. It wasn't like erasing bad memories, but more about learning to live with them. Even so, none of us dared to suggest going back to the lookout, not even during the day. The place had become a silent taboo, a space we preferred to keep in the shadows of the past. Deep down, the biggest lesson we learned was to value the feeling of safety and the precautions that had once seemed unnecessary. We were no longer the same. Each of us carried the weight of the experience in different ways, but we all agreed on one thing: that night wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. And in a way, it brought us even closer together.